It is an old saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Those who believe the motive is the most important factor in any undertaking will be puzzled by this saying. For is it not right motive the first step in the Buddhist path? And is not stressed again and again that each step is set about with danger if the motive for taking is not pure? But beware of good motives. There are good intentions and good intentions, and things are not always what they seem. Nothing is easier than to give up the world because one is incompetent in the affairs of the world. There is no wisdom in scorning riches simply because one is unable to attain them, nor is despising the pleasures for senses because one has not the means of fulfilling them. If the desire for those things exists, and if the desire is thwarted by circumstance, to add self-deception to frustration is to exchange a lesser hell for a greater. No hell is worse than that in which one lives without knowing it. For the desire which is scorned for no other reason than that it cannot be satisfied is the greatest of man's enemies. One may pretend that it does not exist, that one has surrendered it, but one must simply answer the question, if I could satisfy that desire, would I? If that is not answered, to make a show of giving up the world, to take up aesthetic life, not of desire, but of necessity, to pride oneself upon it, that is to hide one's face from the enemy, and so become doubly vulnerable. Thus, the first step on the path is to know what you want and not what you ought to want. Only in this way can the pilgrim set out upon his journey fully prepared. Otherwise, he is like a general that leads a campaign into an unknown territory, who instead of ascertaining his own strengths and his strength as position of his foe, concerns himself only with what he imagines these things ought to be. However good his imaginations, he will without doubt lead his army into a hell. That is Good Intentions by Alan Watts, one of his many essays that he's written over the years. Super interesting. I think that's one of those lines in there, to repeat them again. No hell is worse than that in which one lives without knowing it. And however good his imaginations, he will without doubt lead his army into a hell. Super interesting, super thought-provoking, of course. Regarding that, I'm not entirely sure why I'm bringing this up specifically today, yet there seems to be a little bit of a sort of theme going on with myself at the moment, is that, you know, simply because you think you ought to want these things, should you want these things? And simply because you think that, you know, you hold the right motive, you know, doesn't that necessarily mean that the path that you're taking is, you know, an enlightened path, a path worth taking, a path you should take, simply because you think you hold the right motives for it. Like it says, good intentions pave the road to hell. I think many times in our lives, we kind of grow up, um, you know, maybe more or less by default, in a way of which we sort of allow others to create the intentions that we believe we should have. We think that perhaps, you know, maybe not we, I shouldn't use that word, perhaps should I, yeah, I grow up and I've grown up to, you know, allow other people's intentions, other people's thoughts, other people's desires to inflict my own, to complicate my own, to perhaps substitute my own. You know, why is it that we feel the need to have these desires, have these wants, have these things of which we think are good intentions, but yet we're slowly paving our way to hell? I think a lot of the time, many people that you see out there protesting, out there taking up arms, fall under that category just again and again and again. And I think part of a larger vision of these things, when you see one world circumstance change to another circumstance. Say you've got the wars in Ukraine, and then you've had COVID-19, and well, actually back to front, right? You had COVID-19, then you had the wars in Ukraine, and then um, even in between that, you had Black Lives Matter. You had all these other things that happen across the thing. All these things that perhaps sure do deserve attention, do deserve people to fight for. And now you've got things with Palestine, Israel, all these sorts of things going on now. And it's just, you look at particularly people of the West, is that each circumstance, people seem to change themselves for that circumstance, to fit the mold, to think that this is what other people want to see of them. Performative sort of, what would you say, broadcasting of themselves towards the outer world. And it's strange. It's really strange that we're so easily susceptible to other people's wants and desires and what we think people should want of us, or what we think the world expects of us, to so many degrees that we even think that, this is a just cause. But this just cause really, I mean, there's a just cause and then there's a just cause, right? There's good intentions and there's good intentions, as Alan Watts said. It's interesting to think about that a little bit, to wonder about how many circumstances in my own life have I been caught up in what I would assume were good intentions, were just causes, were things of which I think I should have supported or did support, or things of which I think I should go down or didn't go down. I've come to find time and time again that life itself is going to present you with a myriad of different circumstances of which you do not know what the outcome for those things is going to lead you to. And funnily enough, 9 times out of 10, it's typically taking you to a place, well, seemingly for myself, it's typically taking you to a place setting you up for the next thing that was even grander than what you imagined initially, or what you had hoped for, or what you wanted for yourself. I think oftentimes our intentions, our vision for ourselves can be incredibly limiting in that factor, for it to be a little bit constraining on our lives. And perhaps what we imagine for ourselves isn't necessarily the destination that we should take or go towards or be on. It's not of our imagination. The reality of those things typically does not line up. And the circumstances of that intention, of that desire that you want to hold for yourself, that destination that you're sort of navigating yourself towards, perhaps doesn't hold or warrant the right sacrifices, or you aren't in the right frame for it. And perhaps maybe you're better suited for other things. And I think if we are incredibly honest with ourselves, brutally honest, because it's tough, right? I think a lot of the times now we practice the art of self-deception. So we can't even see the path that we're laying in front of us, and we don't even know if the good intentions that we hold for ourselves or for others or for our desires are actually in fact good intentions, or yet they're masquerading for another thing that we've so eloquently sort of learnt how to do so well throughout our lives in various other circumstances. It's just pretend. But where does that pretending get you? Where does it really take us at the end? Probably hell. Probably a path we don't want to be on. Probably a destination we shouldn't get to. And I think, funnily enough, in my own life, I've seen this play out. Obviously, in retrospect, it's tough to sort of see it as it happens, right? It's really tough to see it happen in the present moment until it's actually gone past that. I think what ends up happening through that is that I'm going through a circumstance of my life and I'm thinking, God, this is not where I want to be right now. I don't want to be doing these things. There's been many times where like my bank account's just hitting zero. It's going past zero typically nowadays, right? And I'm seeing rents due, I'm seeing bills are due, I'm seeing these due, I'm seeing I got to put fuel in the car, let alone, and I've got to go try and make some more money quickly before all these things elapse. And sometimes those things do elapse, and sometimes I'm like, what is going on? I thought I had the right direction for myself. Why is everything working against me, seemingly? And it's not until retrospect that I could vision that and I could see it. It's like, oh no, I went through those things because it diverted my pathway and made me go over in this direction. It made me take this certain circumstance over here, which taught me a bunch of different skills, taught me a lot about myself, taught me a lot about different things or different ways of the world. And now it's brought me over here, which now, in fact, I have an even bigger vision for myself. I have a bigger direction for myself, and actually a direction that if I look inwardly, it feels as if it's more aligned to my higher calling, my vocation, whatever that might be. Robert Greene, in his book Mastery, which I'll cover on this podcast, I'll cover a little bit in it, he talks about aligning yourself to the vocation of your life. And now I used to think of the word vocation as some sort of, my vocation is my work, it's my job. But in fact, in actuality, if you look up the definition for vocation, it's your spiritual calling for your life. It's your spiritual aspirations, a higher calling for yourself, one that is deeply aligned to a greater version, a more genuine version, an inner version of yourself. Nothing is easier than to give up the world because one is incompetent in the affairs of the world. For the desire which is scorned for no other reason than that it cannot be satisfied is the greatest of man's enemies. For desire that is scorned because it cannot be satisfied is the greatest of man's enemies. It's interesting, oftentimes, and this is why I've retreated from social media so much, is because I can see the the deep effects it has on my psyche throughout the days. Particularly if you read through comment sections and things of that nature, it's always full of people scorning others for things that they don't have, whether it be intelligence, relationship, circumstance, money, a life that they believe is better than their own, or a viewpoint that they believe is different to their own. Whatever it might be, oftentimes it's all coming from a place of which simply because you cannot satisfy it. And I think that question he asks himself there and gets us all to ask ourselves, would you do these things if you were able to satisfy them? If you were able to do them? Would you then take them if you had the opportunity to do them? And I think if we're genuinely honest with ourselves, a lot of people want to pander, a lot of people want to create themselves into this vision of themselves as they do not need or do not have any wants or desires or of the flesh, right? They're so much higher above it all. I'm above money. I don't need money. I don't need these things. I don't need that lifestyle. I don't need that house. But if you were given the opportunity to have all these things, would you take them? And now perhaps a lot of knee-jerk responses is going to be, no, of course not. I wouldn't take that. That's for those other people. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we probably would take them. We probably would take those things within our lives, right? And I think that the whole entire problem is that the worst kind of hell is one that you don't know that you're in. And you only don't know that you're in it because you haven't been truthful to yourself. You haven't told the truth, whatever that might fucking be. I think an easier way to look at it is just, perhaps maybe not just telling the truth, but try not to lie, at least, right? Try not to lie. Probably easier than tell the truth. I think Jordan Peterson talks about that a lot, right? And I think I'm very guilty of this throughout my life, is that, perhaps the way I talk to other people perhaps the way I sort of present myself to others, or the way that I talk about my life, the way that I talk about these sorts of things, or the way that I paint these pictures of my life, I then start to believe the lies of which I sort of slowly twist and manipulate things. Because we're all guilty of that, right? We're all guilty of perhaps spinning our life to be a little bit better than it seems. And sure, right? Social media seems to make that task very, very easy nowadays, right? But I think it's very, very easy, although subtle, to be caught up in our own lies and to start believing them. And once we start doing that, all of a sudden, if it wasn't already hard enough to navigate through life, we've just, thrown roadblocks in front of us because we can't even see the destination that we need to take, because perhaps we're not even aware of the vehicle that we're driving anymore, because we've deluded ourselves so much that perhaps that we've deluded ourselves into thinking that, oh no, I'm on an airplane, instead of, oh no, I'm actually on foot through this journey. And there's a big difference between those two things, right? The way you would travel in the air is different to the way that you travel on foot. And if we don't know which one we're on, man, the path just gets so much harder, right? Man, imagine trying to navigate life thinking that you're in a jet when really you're on foot. It'd be impossible. Of course, your circumstances and the insurmountable odds in front of you look insurmountable. It's because you're viewing them in a perspective of delusion. If we were just honest with ourselves, if we just came back down to baseline at least, or at least didn't lie, or stopped ourselves from lying, how much easier would things get to navigate? And I think that's when we stop telling ourselves lies, we stop believing our own falsehoods, and we really look at our motivations for things. Is that, can we really look up and sort of see, oh, hang on, I thought I was paving the pathway to a greater life, but now that I'm looking up, I've realized that I'm paving it to a place that I really do not want to go. Yeah. And perhaps when we're truthful, we don't even need to look up. Perhaps when we're truthful to ourselves and to life, it appears to me that my vision for my life, that I have for it, and the desires and directions for it. Now, I'm not saying don't hold a direction for yourself. I'm not saying don't have a vision for your life, because that's where everything is going to be grounded in, is you don't want to be a rudderless sailboat, right? You want to be you want to be sailing a boat of which you know the port and destination you're sailing towards, because you don't want any wind to be favorable to you. Because if any wind's favorable, then goddamn, it's just going to blow you off course, right? And then, of course, you say, well, life is hard. Life is difficult. It's blowing me off course this way and that. Shouldn't I, just go with the best wind? Right? Shouldn't the circumstance be easier? And I would say to that, this is what the famous Jim Rohn would always say, is that don't wish for things to be easier. Wish for yourself to be better. And I think we only reach that place of betterness if we are firstly able to at least not lie to ourselves. It's interesting. It's very interesting, right? I'm not sure what you guys are thinking about this, but man, there's so many circumstances in my life. Thus, the first step on the path is to know what you want and not what you ought to want. So the first step, align yourself with what you know you actually want out of life. And really, and that might be very brutally honest, and a lot of things, come back into Robert Greene's book, Mastery. How do you find out what you truly want in life? one of the steps that you need to take in order to find that is to actually go back into your past as a child. What were those natural inclinations you held for yourself, those natural pulls towards it? Because as a child, you're so raw and so unfiltered that you're just innately going to be pulled towards the things that you naturally desire and want and brings you joy. And that's always a good place to start, at the very least, because that's going to set up your pathway. So, how do you know what you want, not what you ought to want? Go back into your past. Look at what you always longed to do, or something that you held skills in, or something that you could do effortlessly without sleeping. Now, take that one with a grain of salt, right? Because perhaps not all good things are effortless. Only in this way can a pilgrim set out upon his journey fully prepared. Otherwise, he is like a general that leads a campaign into an unknown territory, who is, instead of ascertaining his own strength and the strength of the position of his foe, concerns himself only with what he imagines these things ought to be. Only imagine these things as they only ought to be. Yeah. Interesting, right? I'll leave you with that. Are we just imagining things as they ought to be instead of actually ascertaining our own strength, our own desires, our own skill sets, and that of the world around us, of the pathways that we're choosing to take for ourselves? Are we deeply reflective of ourselves? Are we telling the truth, or at least not lying to ourselves? Are we navigating the pathway after with all the reconnaissance done? Or are we just hoping that it's the way that we want it to be? You know? Are we just hoping that the pathway that we're building for ourselves in life is the pathway of which we want to take? Are we just making that assumption for ourselves and leaving it at that? Interesting. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much. See you guys soon.